Today we're going to talk about Stoicism. Stoicism corresponds to the ancient period, specifically the 3rd century BC. It is a philosophical movement that came after Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle and has continued to evolve over the centuries, undergoing various transformations. It's always difficult to approach such a major philosophical movement because the question is where to begin. This is particularly difficult with Stoicism because it corresponds to what could be called a total philosophy. It is not just a system of thought, but both a theoretical and practical philosophy, directed towards both understanding and action in the world, and therefore aimed at the individual. Let's start with a few quotes from memory, because I haven't prepared this video. I prefer to improvise, give some pointers, and then let each individual take what they want and continue their own research. So, let's start with the quote that is often used to summarize Stoicism. There are things that depend on us, and there are things that do not depend on us. Stoic philosophy is already based on this first separation, which we must become aware of in order to understand our limits as human beings and as individuals. There are things that depend on us, such as working hard to succeed, seeking the truth, and acting well. However, it does not depend on us to be tall, strong, powerful, or beautiful, or to be born in a particular place. While the distinction between what depends on us and what does not depend on us may seem clear, it can be debated. For example, the Stoics say that it does not depend on us to be rich, but one could argue that it does depend on us to be rich if we focus our actions on material and financial success. Nevertheless, the Stoics call for an awareness of this distinction as a first step towards recognizing our limitations and our fundamental finitude. From this perspective, Stoic philosophy is a call for humility, which is simply the recognition of our powerlessness and our limitations. If we have wishes, desires, or ambitions that are completely unrealistic, we will inevitably be confronted with our limitations. We will not be able to access everything we desire, and when we encounter obstacles to our desires, we may become unhappy. In short, if we desire impossible things, we will suffer, because we will realize that, by definition, what is impossible is not accessible to us. This may seem obvious and banal, but the Stoics took pains to emphasize it because in our daily behavior, we tend to forget it. We tend to believe that certain things depend on us when they do not. The Stoics offer concrete examples to illustrate this. For instance, we know that our life on this earth is limited in time, and yet we tend to behave as if we have all the time in the world. To say it succinctly, if I desire impossible things, I will suffer. I will suffer because I will realize that, by definition, what is impossible is not accessible to me. So, it seems totally obvious and banal to say that one might say that this is really philosophy. To say that what is impossible is in a sense a tautology. But if the Stoics take the trouble to specify it, it is because in our daily behavior, in our actual behavior, we tend to forget it. We tend to believe that certain things can depend on us when they do not, and they take a few very concrete examples. The first example is that I am aware that my life is limited. My existence on this earth is limited in time, and in fact the existence of all human beings is limited. So, when someone dies, even if it is someone I cared a lot about, even if it is someone I loved, I must accept their disappearance. I must accept the death of that person, since it is in the essence of human beings to be born, to live, and to die. Being sad because a loved one dies, for the Stoics, is first and foremost a logical aberration, and it is true, it is a logical aberration. I cannot make the people I love eternal, it is a fact. So, this first limit of human nature, which is death, thus the temporal limit, well, I must not only know that it exists, but I must accept it. And this is where we see that among the Stoics, understanding something, being aware of something is not simply knowing that it exists. It is accepting it in the depths of one's being and even in the depths of one's flesh. And it is at this moment that we realize that Stoic philosophy is not just a theoretical philosophy, but a practical philosophy. It is both a philosophy and a psychology. Our life is not eternal. We must accept death. We must accept our own death. So Epicurus said, learning to live is learning to die, and philosophy is all the work of accepting death. But it's not accepting it as something sad, regrettable, It's accepting it as a necessity, accepting it as a law of nature. And only when I deeply accept it as a law of nature can I emancipate myself from the sadness, grief, and suffering that this idea normally conveys. If you think for a moment, you try to imagine at what age, in what place, under what circumstances you will die a natural death. Will you die in your sleep? Will you die in a car accident, from an incurable disease? Well, right away, what will invade you is a feeling of anxiety, and this feeling of anxiety for the Stoics is proof that in a certain way, you have not accepted the idea of death. So we find a lot of this idea, whether among the Stoics or the Epicureans, which is to say that death is nothing. Death is nothing. Why? Because we live, well, death is not there. And when we die, well, we are no longer there to suffer. So ultimately, we never meet death. Death carries us away, but in a snap of a finger that makes it so we don't have time to see it. So the fear of death is the fear of an idea and not the fear of a reality. It's the fear of a mental projection. And that's where we start to get a little closer to the core of Stoic philosophy, which is the role of imaginary projection that makes the individual never completely in their present reality. We are never really in the present moment, if we can say so. We are always anticipating the future or nostalgic for the past, but ultimately, we are never really in the present. The problem with these projections is that they give rise to emotions that the Stoics called passions. So that's the old term for talking about emotions. So passion in Greek is called pathos, which means suffering. And passion is what we are passive to. It's what we undergo. Fear, regret, jealousy, envy, anger, all of these are emotions, these are passions. But these are things that are first creations of our mind, and it's proof that we do not accept existence as it is. I gave the example of the fear of death, but we could take a lot of other examples. If, for example, I'm jealous of my neighbor because he has a nicer car than me, or because he has a more beautiful wife than me, more beautiful children than me, whatever. Well, this jealousy is a projection of my mind. That is to say, if my neighbor didn't have everything that I don't have, I wouldn't be unhappy. So it's because my neighbor has what I don't have that I have this frustration that manifests itself as jealousy. But in this case, it's not my neighbor who is responsible, it's me. It's me who lets this thought and the emotions that stem from that thought take over. It's me who lets these emotions take over me, take over my emotional state. Stoic in everyday language means unemotional, impassive, without passions. It's a form of indifference that is not linked to a lack of consciousness. On the contrary, it is a controlled and assumed indifference that corresponds to the awareness that there are things that do not depend on us. The Stoics ask us, why be affected by something that is beyond your control? Anger won't make the reasons for anger disappear, and jealousy won't make the reasons for jealousy disappear. For the Stoics, emotions are like the heat produced by energy that we cannot channel. So we need to externalize this energy through emotions, but it doesn't solve the problem. If I hit my knee against the corner of my coffee table, insulting or hitting the table won't make the pain go away. It will only allow me to expend the energy caused by my pain and resulting anger. Similarly, if I watch a TV show with Bernard Henry Levy as the main guest and insult him or throw my remote at the TV, it won't solve anything. Therefore, the Stoics tell us that it's pointless to be in a state of emotion and that in reality, our emotions mask our inability to accept the world as it is. That's why another Stoic quote is, "Don't try to change reality, but to change your point of view on reality." Of course, we might think that this philosophy is one of submission or passivity, but the Stoics distinguish between what is within our control and what is not. There are things we can control, and the Stoics tell us to give them the strength to change what can be changed. The first difficulty is to know what can be changed and to act at our level on what can be changed. But I shouldn't have pretensions beyond my means. I shouldn't think that I can revolutionize the world alone with my little arms. I must accept that the changes and transformations that I can make in the world will be limited by my abilities, which are relatively small compared to the world. But I have a choice between doing what I can and giving up and saying it's pointless. If I choose to give up, then for the Stoics, I am not doing what is within my control. I am abandoning, resigning, and giving up. But why? Because I cannot bear the idea of not having more control over the world. So actually, I renounce out of ego. I renounce because I tell myself that I will not be able to make the changes that I want to make. Okay, but this reasoning is dictated by the ego, which is dictated by emotion, which is dictated by the feeling and desire for power. But for the Stoics, we are always in aberration. Therefore, for the Stoics, we act on the perimeter on which we can act, and we don't worry about the rest. We don't worry about the rest because the rest does not belong to us, because the rest belongs to the world, and the world continues on its path without us. We are part of the world, we leave our mark on it, but we are not its owner. It is up to us as individuals to do things that we are capable of. It is not up to us as individuals to act in place of others. So rather than a philosophy of renunciation, I would rather talk about a philosophy of lucidity. I believe, and this is a very personal judgment, that people who accomplish great things are people who do not worry about what they are not capable of doing. They are people who care exclusively about what they are capable of doing. Having unattainable dreams is the best way to never achieve a single one. Desiring the impossible is the best way to remain inactive, therefore passive, and therefore frustrated, which necessarily accompanies this passivity. The philosophy of the Stoics is a practical philosophy because it is a philosophy that pushes us to bring our actions into conformity with our thoughts. As we said earlier, if I evolve in emotions such as anger, jealousy, resentment, my actions will bear the mark of these emotions. On the contrary, if I act in enthusiasm, if I act in a sort of unconditional joy, of joy that does not need a reason to exist, then for the Stoics, I am much freer because I do not depend on my emotions, because I do not depend on an unrealistic ambition. I do not depend on illusion. For the Stoics, our emotions make us slaves, that's very clear. Our emotions prevent us from seeing and understanding reality as it is. It's like a filter that we would put between us and reality, and which would deform this reality in our eyes. If I assume that the world existed before me and will always exist after me, on the one hand, it relativizes my ability to act and transform this world. But that doesn't mean I'm not capable of anything. It means that I am aware of the limits within which I can act. Emotions make us slaves because by definition we do not choose to have emotions. In fact, for the Stoics, it would be more accurate to say that we suffer our emotions because we do not make the effort to master them. The Stoics believe that the goal of human existence is to achieve happiness and wisdom, since for them, wisdom is the condition of happiness, and wisdom is also linked to knowledge, to understanding. I understand the world, I understand how it works, I accept it, and because I accept it, I can be happy. There is a quote from Sartre that sums up the Stoics' point of view quite well, which is to say, what is important is not what has been done to us, but what we do with what has been done to us. This means that we all have a character or temperament, even if these two notions should be distinguished. And we are all more or less inclined to feel, to experience emotions, passions. This does not depend entirely on us. There are people who are rather hot-headed, people who are rather calm, people who are rather anxious, others who are rather peaceful. That's true, but nothing prevents us from working on this. Nothing prevents us from becoming aware of this character that is ours and working to change it, since that is within our possibilities. And to change that, well, it requires a process of understanding the world and its laws. The Stoic vision of the world is a deterministic one. This means that for the Stoics, everything that happens in the universe happens for a certain reason. But for a certain reason does not mean that there are gods pulling strings and pushing us to act in one way rather than another. One could summarize it like that, but it would be a bit too simplistic. And above all, there are those who would say, oh, it's still a religious vision. It doesn't interest me. It's not for me. No, it's not that simple. It means that when something happens, there are causes for that event. No event occurs without causes. So when we say that everything has a reason, what we really mean is that everything has a cause. But the word reason is interesting. We'll see why. Everything that happens has a cause or a set of causes, which means that we can explain everything that happens. Explaining does not mean automatically accepting, and explaining does not mean justifying in the sense of legitimizing on a normative or moral level. For example, if a man commits a crime, we can explain his crime through a medical, psychological, or psychiatric diagnosis. We might say, for example, that he is someone who has suffered extreme violence himself, who has become what we call a psychopath, and that he acted on it. Well, but that doesn't justify his actions in the sense that it doesn't excuse him. For the Stoics, this distinction between explaining and excusing doesn't really have a place. When I say that it doesn't have a place, of course it does have a place in the social framework, but it doesn't have a place in the sense that if something happens, it's because it had reasons to happen anyway. It's because it had causes, since nothing happens without causes. Everything that happens is an effect of causes that precede it. So if we were able, from our point of view of knowledge, to identify all the causes of what happens, we would realize that everything is normal. And I should say rather that everything is logical, everything is rational. Reason encompasses everything that is logical to understand. And if something happens, it's because that thing had causes, and those causes are understandable. I'm not saying that we are capable of identifying all the causes of what happens, but we are capable of knowing that these causes exist. I'll take the example of coincidence, the famous coincidence. You meet someone you haven't seen in a while, and you meet them in a totally improbable context. It's not possible that we meet here now like this. What a coincidence! The coincidence, or rather the feeling of extraordinary coincidence, is something we have all experienced before, but for the Stoics, it only corresponds to our individual point of view. And if we wanted to be a little mean, we would say that it corresponds to our point of view as ignorant. Ignorant because in fact, we are surprised by something when we do not know the causes. That's actually what surprise is. We don't know the causes. But if we had known the causes of the event before it happened, we would have been able to anticipate it. We would have been able to predict it as the logical, rational, and necessary consequence of those causes. Let me use an image. Imagine you are in the sky and you can see a city. You see all the streets between the buildings, and therefore you see all the people moving around. So you are able to see when two people are going to cross paths at a street corner because you have the omniscient point of view. You are above it all, and so you see the meeting before it happens. For you, nothing is surprising, but for the individuals who meet and bump into each other on the street corner, it is extraordinary. So it's a matter of point of view. Surprise, astonishment, coincidence, the feeling of coincidence. It's a feeling that is unique to the individual. But if the individual was capable of rising to a rational point of view, that is to say, an objective point of view, the omniscient point of view, then they would not be surprised, they would expect it. For the Stoics, nothing that happens is surprising because they adopt this omniscient point of view, because they know that when something happens, there were reasons for it to happen, and that's determinism. It's the fact of saying that everything that happens is the necessary, that is to say, the fatal effect of causes that precede this event. For the Stoics, the universe is entirely rational. If it is rational, it obeys the laws of logic, so it is understandable in its entirety. If reality is rational, if reality is logical, then man must, as far as possible, conform to this model of rationality. As part of the universe, man must seek to behave like this universe. The more he behaves like the universe, that is to say, in a rational and logical manner, the less he will be subject to suffering, frustration, sadness. In short, the less he will be subject to his emotions. The closer he comes to this model of rationality, the more he will be free. And the more he is free, the happier he will be. Stoicism is a practical philosophy. In fact, today Stoicism has converted into personal development techniques. I have nothing against personal development techniques. I simply think that they are a superficial aspect of something much deeper, which is a complete philosophy. We cannot simply take the practical aspect of Stoic philosophy and say that it is enough. No. Because for the Stoics, the ability to control our emotions, the ability to become the captain of the ship of our existence, can only be the result of a process of understanding the world. Understanding the world does not mean accepting it, but it is impossible to accept it if we do not seek to understand it. Understanding the world means understanding that what happens has reasons for happening, and that what is the only judge. I may individually deplore a situation, but this situation has a reason for being. And no matter if I don't understand the meaning of it, no matter if I don't understand the causes, this situation is there, and I can only accept it. There is no point in resisting what is implacable. There is no point in getting angry because it's raining or because it's cold. It won't change anything, but if I get angry, at least I can warm up. That's something. But if I accept what is initially unpleasant to me, then it ceases to be unpleasant. Personally, I use Stoicism a lot when I read comments under my videos. I tell myself, well, there's a reason for this, so I accept it. Stoicism is very practical, and above all, it has an effect on us when we read fragments of it. I really recommend reading Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, Thoughts for Myself, and you will realize that as you read, you have a strange feeling of calmness that balances and aligns you inside. And when you are in this state of mind, when you are in this state of neutrality towards your emotions, you realize that everything is justified from a rational point of view. At least everything is justified. And if life is not limited to reason, then there is no reason why life should be a long succession of suffering. Thank you. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Join our community and be the first to know when new content drops. Subscribe now.